Good morning, hunters of the night, or when you watch this video. I have a very polarizing topic for you today. A topic that has both sides very much disagreeing with each other. The Castlevania series rebooted in the early 2010, and today's video is going to be discussing whether it was a resounding win or an overwhelming failure that left a stain on the Castlevania name. There's a few things that have to be said before we just jump right into the video, so bear with me for a little bit. Castlevania has transformed into so many different genres. While most typically associate with the Symphony of the Night Metroidvania style, just because a game doesn't fit that specific genre doesn't already exactly mean that it's a bad game. Just automatically assuming that it's a dog water game is a little bit silly because there's other good Castlevania games such as Curse of Darkness, Castlevania Judgment. It's a joke. For those who played that Wii game, that game sucks ass. Yeah. Although the Castlevania series has jumped into multiple genres, we can compare Lords of Shadow 2, and Mirror of Fate to other Castlevania games. So for the 3D games, we're going to be mainly looking at like Lament of Innocence, Curse of Darkness, or even Castlevania 64, and maybe Legacy of Darkness. Lords of Shadow gets a lot of hate for being like a generic hack and slash, and it's kind of missing that Castlevania quirkiness that's like bam, right in your face. These games still have their own personality, but they kind of veer away from the original style and head more towards like a Western style of design, which isn't bad in its own right. The designs and themes in this game, they aren't garbage in any way. Monsters fit the Castlevania style, the characters stick out, and even the level design is gorgeous. There's a lot of variety too in the levels, which is very much appreciated and helps the levels feel unique. Though during the reboot's full runtime over like 4 years, we saw 3 games released, all developed by Mercury Steam. These developers are also responsible for like Metroid Samus Returns. Now financially, these games were a success. I mean, the first Lords of Shadow is the best-selling Castlevania game of all time. I mean, this really was kind of like the first time that we saw Castlevania go for that AAA game developer all in your face, and it was like being thrust in the mainstream during this time. It was pretty big back in the day, and with over 1.7 million sales, it put Castlevania back on the map and like in everybody's face once again. And honestly, it was a lot of younger fans' first like entry into the whole franchise. Which, honestly, I don't think it's that bad of a game. It's got plenty of nods to the other games, pretty decent hack and slash, and I'm just gonna say it, the entire Lords of Shadow reboot has the strongest story delivery out of the entire Castlevania franchise. Do I think it's the best story in the whole series? No, absolutely not. But it does present its lore and narrative in the best way with like plenty of context to deep dive into. I mean, hell, it's got really good voice acting from Patrick Stewart and Robert Carlyle. I thoroughly enjoyed the entire story of Gabriel Belmont. His tragic themes and narratives are played exceptionally well, with plenty of combat that kind of expands the world. Well, that really isn't the focus of this video. Maybe one day it might be. I truly love that, and while it seems like it's a shit ton of exposition, we never really got that for like any of the other Belmonts. So the more I learn about the Castlevania lore, even if it's just for the rebooted timeline, I'm still happy about it. Lords of Shadow did have its issues, but for a game that came out in 2010, not that bad. Being totally honest, it's not that bad. Compared to some of the other games these days, it's not good. But back then it wasn't bad. While the sales were astronomical for a Castlevania game, incredible sales does not equal relevancy. The first Lords of Shadow didn't have the best flow for combat progression. The combat after a while just kind of felt overwhelmingly stale, with you kind of repeating the same like heavy combos over and over again. There was a few parry mechanics that got brought back from like Curse of Darkness, but the way you parried in Castlevania, it would like do a slow-mo effect, and it just kind of like ruined, once again, the whole flow of combat. If they didn't have that like slow-mo effect and it was just like an instant, then you could go back into fighting, it would have been great. Would have been perfect. But yeah, if it was just faster paced and more challenging instead of being kind of like, I guess, whip spongy instead of bullet spongy, then I think the game would have been more memorable, or at least the combat would have like kept fans more into Lords of Shadow. And then also, the boss fights, they were pretty fun. I mean, most Castlevania games have iconic boss fights, and Lords of Shadow also didn't disappoint. The problem with Lords of Shadow is that it focused too much on like quick time events, and it kind of was just like, okay, let me just beat on this guy, dodge some projectiles, all that kind of stuff. If they didn't have like the constant quick time events, it would have done better. And that's also the same way for the platforming. If it had been more fluid, like similar to a Prince of Persia game, which isn't really going super hard in platforming, especially like the earlier ones, it just would have felt a little bit better because it kind of just feels like it's used as a loading screen. Almost, it's very slow. The later levels, it kind of expands a little bit more and gets a little bit more confusing, and that kind of makes it fun, but it just is what it is. Lords of Shadow 2 definitely improved on that, but we'll get to Lords of Shadow 2 in a second. Now, the next entry into the reboot was Mirror of Fate. I have nothing bad to say about Mirror of Fate. This game was a full-on ball drainer. It's like one of the best quintessential Castlevania experiences, with plenty of lore, a little bit of Metroidvania, and an incredible storyline. And the combat, it's very similar to Lords of Shadow, but it's done just better here. It just feels better in a 2D space. And that's all you can say about it. It just feels better. There are also some pretty wonderful puzzles in Mirror of Fate, and it kind of gets your old thinker going a little bit. So yeah, they did a really, really good job. Truly, I think that Mirror of Fate is the best mix of like classic Castlevania with new Lords of Shadow storytelling, and then just a hint of Metroidvania. So, yeah, really, really good job. This game sort of acted as like a prequel and a sequel at the same time, so basically it kind of filled in the plot points that were left out in the first game, and then helped bridge the gap to the second game. Now you also get to play as 3 different Belmonts, and also, this Simon Belmont design has my blood pressure rising. I mean, come on, look at this dude. He's a total badass design. This is actually one of my favorite character designs in all of Castlevania. Barbarian Belmonts had them vampires quivering. Mirror of Fate also did a really good job of returning to that 2D platforming Metroidvania that we kind of get, where we get to explore, and it has a lot more replayability that was completely missing out from the other 2 Lords of Shadow. Honestly, I want to just keep talking about this game, but to be totally fair to Mirror of Fate, it needs its own like long-form video content, so it just deserves that at least. So I will eventually just completely splurge on how much I like Mirror of Fate. I mean, and we also got to return to Dracula's Castle. We didn't really have that for Lords of Shadow 1 or 2. It's just very much sidestepped or used as a kind of a story point. Lords of Shadow 2 kind of expands on it a little bit more, but the Castlevania scenes in Lords of Shadow 2 just ruin the whole flow. They're like the only interesting parts of that game, but at the same time, you're just like, why the fuck am I here? Anyway, Mirror of Fate, generally 9 out of 10. Very incredible game. It honestly hurts my heart that it is one of the poorest selling Castlevania games, but I personally think that has to do with the fact of like the other 2 Lords of Shadow being like generic linear hack and slashes instead of like a 2D explorable space. And I think, if I remember right, it only came out on 3DS in the beginning, and then they ported it to like PC, Steam, all the other platforms just way after the fact instead of like during its opening release. If I remember right, I could be totally wrong, but yeah, it just unfortunately did not do good. And while Mirror of Fate was the worst selling of these 3 games, it without a doubt is the strongest entry in the rebooted timeline. Without a doubt, it's the strongest it's just so good. And Mercury's team did a really good job of bringing that Castlevania that I grew up with back to life, and it wasn't full of like bullshit QuickTime events, and it still felt like I was traversing Dracula's castle, slowly getting stronger and stronger with each combat. And it's just, damn it dude, it's just like a total shame that it really didn't get the recognition that it deserved. Also, just as a side note, Mirrors of Fate really expanded on some of the boss's lore that you see in Dracula's castle. That was really fun. I mean, there's a lot more tragic characters to Dracula's castle, and it was just very well done. I mean, gives fans more room to speculate, and just overall really fits the lore of the setting, especially with like a tragic anti-hero and all that kind of stuff. It really did a good job of expanding into more interesting characters. Moving on to the final game of the reboot, Lords of Shadow 2. Listen, I am just gonna say it. If a Castlevania game does not follow the standard naming conventions, like if it doesn't sound like Castlevania Shadow's Redemption Requiem of the Night, it's probably not gonna be a good Castlevania game, just because it's missing that quirky edginess that like almost every other Castlevania game has. So, it doesn't follow that naming convention as a new modern game. Abort. Abort, dude. It's not gonna be that good. I am talking mad shit, but let me just say, Castlevania Lords of Shadow 2 has the coolest, best cinematic, the coolest, like, hype trailer for a Castlevania game. Like, I think it was like E3, I have it written down, E3 like 20, no I don't have it down. It's just an old E3 trailer. Dude, that was, just watch it. Even watching it like almost 10 years later, I love this cinematic. It is gorgeous. And the other cinematics in this game aren't bad at all. Like, they get their point across, they do these big set designs and everything like that. Like, that's one thing that Mercury Steam did really good with the reboot. They crushed their vision and their design of these games. Like, they did a really, really good job. But yeah, if you watch that trailer and it doesn't make you hyped to play Castlevania, you're just out of your fucking mind. It's an incredible cinematic. Unfortunately, I don't have the second Lords of Shadow available to record, but there isn't too much to say about this game. I'm not a fan. And I'm trying not to let my bias like take hold, but it's really hard. Lords of Shadow 2 improved gameplay-wise, but then they just took a total step back in story narrative, and it really, really hurts, because the first Lords of Shadow had a really good story. Mirror of Fate had a really good story. And then Lords of Shadow 2 had really good game design, awful storytelling. Like, it's like just poking holes in everything. Now, the improvement gameplay-wise, like, they added a full 360 camera similar to, like, a Curse of Darkness, and it also lowered a lot of the QuickTime events, and gave you, like, newer ways to play around your vampire powers, which is very much appreciated. But it still feels like a total kick in the pants when the narrative and, like, the whole lore of Castlevania just kind of sucks. It feels like a total redo of the first Lords of Shadow. Like, Dracula spends centuries asleep, and then has to regain his strength in order to fight the big bad, and he gets betrayed, and then he does bad things to his family, but it works out in the end. It just, I wish they didn't go this route. I wish I got to feel like the powerful, like, end-all, be-all that Dracula, or Gabriel Belmont, is supposed to be in this. And while I do feel like it's a total repeat, Mercury Steam did do a good job, and also a bad job with this point. Castlevania, the original franchise, has so many stories to tell, so many different, like, Belmonts, like who's the strongest, all that kind of stuff. For Lords of Shadow, there's 3 games, a beginning, a middle, and an end. And it delivers a very much, like, way better cohesive story, but at the same time, there's not a lot of variety. I mean, it felt like they wanted to just rush Gabriel's story instead of expanding on it. And I mean, especially if you were one of the fans who didn't get to play Mirror of Fate, you have no damn clue what's going on. Like, nothing makes sense to you right now. It sucks. It's literally like you got kidnapped by a serial killer, and he's threatening you the entire time, but then he takes you to Walmart and just wants you to get all of his groceries, then come back and he takes you out to dinner. It just doesn't make any sense. But I don't even know what that means in my script. That doesn't make any sense to me. But yeah, Mirrors of Fate, if you didn't get to play that, you're gonna be left with like a mediocre opinion of the other 2 games. It's just kind of sad, because Mirrors of Fate has a prequel moment where it talks about Gabriel, and then it talks about like Trevor, and then Simon. So it's sad. While these games did do pretty decent overall financially, like Lords of Shadow 2 did, I think it sold like 500,000, or getting close to 1 million or something like that. And then, unfortunately, Mirrors of Fate did not sell very well. It didn't leave an overwhelming impact on the Castlevania fandom. I think everybody remembers Lords of Shadow 1, but then they, like, I don't know, the people I talked to on Reddit really didn't seem like they played Lords of Shadow 2 or Mirror of Fate, which is, you know, damn, if you're gonna start a reboot, at least finish the storyline, you know what I mean? But let's go back to, like, the important part. So compared to the other 3D Castlevania games, the Lords of Shadow doesn't even come close to the impact that, let's say, like, Curse of Darkness, Lament of Innocence, or even Castlevania 64 had on the Castlevania community. Like, it's just, it's sad, because Curse of Darkness is in my opinion, the best 3D Castlevania. It has plenty of Metroidvania aspects where you can choose your own weapon, you can play around the devils, it has a shit ton of secrets and exploration, it has a bunch of goofy-ass Easter eggs, like the bowling ball one. What? That's fun, that is Castlevania, and it sucks that they didn't have that in Lords of Shadow. And so, while the storyline of Curse of Darkness is a little bit weaker, and it's a lot harder to follow, it blows everything else out of the water, and has a huge impact on the Castlevania culture. Everybody likes Twink Hector. He's just walking around with like super tight-ass leather, fucking shit up. Hell yeah, man, I'm all about that. But like, Lords of Shadow, you just get depressing Gabriel. And a pretty interesting story, just not a lot of meat, you know? Gabriel has no meat. Zero meat. But Barbarian Belmont, that man has a lot of meat. But yeah, the Lords of Shadow reboot tried to be Castlevania with just a little bit of spice mixed in. And, I mean, I appreciate it. I love Gabriel's story. I love the nods to the other games, but it's just not the Castlevania game that I can come back and play all the time. And I feel like that's a lot of other fans' opinions, too. And just real quick, going back, Mirror Your Fate, you should play that one. If you're a Castlevania fan, you like the original Timeline, play Mirror Your Fate. It's very, very good. Anyway, moving on. Overall, I feel like the reboot is one of those issues that just like lands perfectly in the middle of a topic. Like, yeah, it's really good in some spots. Yeah, it's really bad in some other spots. I keep hitting my microphone. It's really bad in some spots. You know what I mean? It took a more serious approach that I just I don't think that works for a Castlevania game. Like, where's the banging guitar licks? Where's the dope-ass themes? Where are these silly bosses at? It's just not there. And so, while I hate to play a fence sitter, I'm going to lean towards the reboot being a failure. It hurts me to say that, especially since Mirror of Fate is one of my favorite Castlevania games. It's just that there's so much culture and general fanfare that isn't in Lords of Shadow. And do I regret playing them or anything like that? No, not at all. These are good games. They're fun to like play once. But they're not like Castlevania Symphony of the Night, where I play that like every 5 months, I think. I love Symphony of the Night. Or Curse of Darkness, I play that all the time. I love Curse of Darkness. That's like one of my comfort games. Like I said, these are decent games. They just don't live up to that iconic level of like relevancy and culture that the other Castlevania games. So for that, overall, the reboot, it's a failure. It didn't make it. While I respect the devs' like vision for the reboot, it fundamentally just missed out on Castlevania. Give me some sick music scores, give me some decently hard levels, and like a decent story, and I'd play that shit nonstop. Anyway, that's all I have for this video. Please, let me know what you think in the comments below, and kind of expand on some of the things that I missed. I do want y'all to know that I'm probably going to be slowing down video-wise. I really want to try my hand at some like long-form video essays, so just bear with me. I'm still going to be getting out videos like maybe once a week, but I really want to try to put something big together for y'all. And for my Starship Troopers and Warhammer 40k fans, I'm sorry, but don't worry. I'll be coming back to you guys soon, I promise. For 40k, I'm just catching back up on the lore. There's a lot. You know what it's like. You get it. You understand. Starship Troopers, I'm just waiting for some new stuff to drop. There's not a lot to talk about right now, and I feel like if I dropped like a how-to video or base building, the next patch would come out and all that work would be for nothing. So, next patch, I'm gonna come back to Starship Troopers. Anyway, bye.